Give me a swig of coffee. Howdy, y'all. Welcome to History by Phillips. I'm Mr. Phillips, and you're watching the American Revolution lecture series. In the last video, we talked about the war in the West. We talked about three things in the last video. Pretty much fighting along the Appalachian Mountains, what we consider the West. If you typically involved Indians, if you recall, the Indians typically sided with the British during the American Revolution because they was hoping that if Britain would win, they would enforce the Proclamation of 1763. And if you don't recall what that is, pretty much that was a British law stating that no English settler can go west of the Appalachians. You know, build homes, farms, stuff like that. So that's typically why the Indians would side with them. The fighting would be fierce with the Indians. You can call it dirty, guerrilla tactics, hit and run, whatever you call it. The Americans would adopt it. One brutal form of it would be scalping. I don't know if you see here, British soldiers would pay Indians for pretty much the tops of people's heads. It's pretty much proof that you killed somebody back in the day, so they pay them. This infuriates the Patriots. Patriots will be guilty of this practice as well, but this is just me. This is how dirty it got. It got nasty. One notable Indian leader to make note of is Joseph Brant. He's a Mohawk chief. He would cause the Patriots problems along the New York, Pennsylvania area in the Appalachian Mountains. We also talked about the war at sea. We need to mention real quick. Remember, Britain's Navy, best in the world, best equipped, best trained, yada yada yada. America's Navy doesn't exist. They have to rely on pirates. One loon in particular, John Paul Jones, crazy. Pretty much just put some cannons on a little merchant ship, went to England, harassed England throughout the war there, ended up taking on one of Britain's notable warships, the Cyprus. I'm sure I just butchered that name. With his boat, the Bohemian Richard, I do believe was his boat's name. Anyway, long story short, that would be like a pickup truck taking on a tank today. He fought all day. The famous quote saying from the British commanders, "Hey, are you ready to surrender?" John Paul Jones replies, "After hours of fighting, mind you, I have not yet begun to fight." That's kind of the attitude the Americans have during this war. It just won't be put down. But remember, pretty much the British plan, the strategy to win this war, is first they're going to set up a big blockade. If you don't remember what a blockade is, essentially they're shutting down trade with pretty much from Europe, down from the Latin American countries, wherever. Nothing can get through to the colonies. Essentially, this makes the whole populace poor, the citizens, the soldiers, you name it. It makes it rough on everybody. This is also started affecting the South, because remember, Britain thinks if they can control New England, the South will follow suit, because typically the further south you went, the more likely they would typically support Britain or be a loyalist. But because of all this, and they start bringing in troops here, and they start treating the South like they did in New England, quartering troops, searches and seizures, not doing justice correctly, meaning they don't, not to speedy trial, not a trial by juries of your own peers, stuff like that. Start violating all these rights you can find in the Bill of Rights today, making these Southerners angry. And these Southerners, mind you, they've been on the frontier since the inception of the colonies. They kind of broke the law to start with, went past the Appalachians. So they're used to, they fought with the Unions. They've loved with the Unions. They grew up, their cultures have traded so, like, they're almost not one and the same, but these settlers might have more in common with some of the Indians on the frontier than they would some of the folks on the East Coast, to say. Anyway, there's just a different breed getting developed. One notables to make note of, one militia group you consider them as, the Overmountain Men from the Watauga region up toward Johnson City. A little bit of Tennessee history for you. But essentially, Lafayette will get a lot of these southern militias like the Overmountain Men, and they would start whooping up on the British in the South. One thing you just don't do to these folks is you challenge them to a fight. These people, they eat acorns, they're tougher than tree bark, they love to fight. That's what they do. So they start whooping up on the British. Eventually, Cornwallis, the commander of the British military, the best way to think of, he eventually gets his troops and he regroups at Yorktown. And that's where we're going to pick up today. Obviously, this is where the war ends. But Yorktown. Yorktown is it's under British occupation. I mean, British control it. I mean, they can get, take a hot shower, get through, resupply. I mean, that's like their base. They took it over. Cornwallis is getting his wits about him, just, planning out the rest of the war. But unbeknownst to him, there's a trap being set on him. So here's the situation. Right now, you have George Washington. Everybody remembers that loon guy makes everybody cross the frozen river at night, march hundreds of miles to go take on a city. Yeah, that guy. He's up in New York. He's been trying to deal with the British up in New York because remember, a lot of this rebellious attitudes in the New England colony. So he's up here in New York. Remember, he's in Valley Forge in Philadelphia, that region. So right now, George Washington's in New York. Then you got his buddy Lafayette, a foreign aide of his. Lafayette, he's leading the Southern Continental Army down here, and he's chasing them up to Yorktown. But unbeknownst to Britain, Ben Franklin, you remember him, the celebrity, he's over there in France, he's winning folks over, yada, yada, yada. Well, Rochambeau, this guy, he's bringing the French war fleet. Now, some 7th graders from last year recalls now, England and France, Britain and France at this time do not like each other. They hate each other's guts. And I know I've said Britain's army and Britain's navy is the best in the world, blah, blah, blah. France ain't nothing to shake a stick at either. I mean, they're right there with Britain. They're just as tough, just as mean, just as experienced. A close second, I would say, at this time. But keep in mind, Napoleon's about to make his appearance, and Napoleon's going to wreak havoc on everybody in Europe. But keep in mind, Rochambeau, he's sympathetic to the American cause, plus he just don't like Britain. So he's bringing a crap ton of warships. The plan is, let me back up to my map here. The plan is, New York's going to pretty much play possum up here in New York and all of a sudden make a rush down to Yorktown. The Southern Army, they're going to squeeze the noose up this way, and the French with Rochambeau, they're coming from France. So essentially what you have is Washington coming from the north, France coming from the sea, and Southern Continental going to trap Cornwallis in Yorktown. And that's exactly what happens. Ends up being 8,000 British soldiers versus 14,000 American/French soldiers, plus the warships behind them. Britain was not expecting this. France catches them off guard. They're able to surround Cornwallis. He's a sitting duck. He has no hope. Game's up. He ends up losing. They have to end up surrendering. It took them a little while. I mean, Cornwallis was stubborn. Not too many casualties. Basically, they surrounded them. I'm sure you've seen in the Western, they catch the bad guy in a little rinky-dink house, and all the sheriffs are like outside waiting for him to come out. So basically what's going on there is just waiting for him to surrender. They eventually surrendered. Little known fact, I don't know if you guys know Yankee Doodle. Yankee Doodle, well, that used to be a joke the British played toward American soldiers, because usually American soldiers at the beginning of the war especially, they'd fight and they would run away because they weren't trained, wasn't disciplined. So the British soldiers start playing Yankee Doodle, making fun like as they ran away. Well, this time when they surrendered, pretty much ending the war, the Patriots were playing Yankee Doodle as the British surrendered. So that's kind of why the Yankee Doodle kind of stuck around in our culture today. So if you're wondering where it came about, this is part of the origin of it. But yeah. The British surrendered. Woo! America. That's it. U.S. history's over. I'm just kidding. There's plenty of things to go on. The war's won. So what happens? Officially, the war is declared over with the Treaty of Paris in 1783. This is, I think this is one of the more important documents. I know people talk about the Declaration of Independence. You got your Articles of Confederation and the U.S. Constitution and all that. But I think this one is pretty important. Reason being is this is one of the first documents recognizing America from somebody else. So essentially in this, Britain had to recognize America as independent. That's one thing for everybody, like, for Americans, like, hey, I'm independent. I'm independent. That's one thing. But it's another thing when other people start saying you're independent. So in this document, Britain's like, okay, the Americas, they're independent. We recognize them. Pretty much they're saying they'll let us fish along the eastern coast, but we still have to pay them back. I mean, we're still part of the deal is we'll still pay them back. We understand the significance of cutting off the colonies, blah blah blah. So I mean, there are some payments being made toward Britain, but for the most part, it smooths over well. The war's over. America is its own. But there's an issue. All these soldiers that's been fighting, they, just like any other job, you expect a paycheck. Well, since it's a brand new country, they're trying to get all. They promised they would get paid after the war. Well, the war's over, and these soldiers, they're still waiting around, wanting their money. They threatened Congress. It takes George Washington, everybody's favorite boy. This really is like a party for George Washington. George Washington, he smooths it over. He works it out with Congress, works it out with the soldiers. The soldiers get paid. Congress starts doing their thing. But keep in mind, George Washington, from the very beginning, from the French and Indian War, he is the Virginia boy from an up-to-do family. But he's a Virginia boy. He fought in the French and Indian War. Got captured. He's seen both sides. He's seen the highs and lows of war. He's been captured. He got named to the General of the Continental Army at a young age. He was so dedicated to winning, he got folks to cross a icy river on Christmas, captured Trenton. And he took a gamble. He just straight up left New York to hopefully catch Cornwallis down in Yorktown. Keep in mind, Yorktown, Virginia, his home state. Everybody's fell in love with it. It's like the heroes come home. Washington. Everybody loves this guy at this point. He's became a legend. He's right up there with Ben Franklin. Everybody loves him. This is part of the reason why he ends up becoming president. He'll ride this fame into the presidency. A lot of folks say he could have stayed king, but they say he was humble enough to step down after 2 terms, since that's why most presidents since then have served 2 terms. There is an exception, but you'll learn about that hopefully in high school. Let's talk about why the Americans won real quick. Why did the Americans win the Revolutionary War? 3 things I'm going to throw out there. One is they had home field advantage. The British knew the land as well because they had Indian allies, but they're fighting from their backyard. Britain, they have to send soldiers from an island across the Atlantic Ocean. So even if they did win, that's still a lot of effort just to win. Just to get people across the ocean, let alone fight on a foreign land. So they had a home field advantage. One big reason is the Allies. If it wasn't for France and Spain and all these helping us out just because they didn't like Britain, it wasn't so much they liked America, but it's just more or less they didn't like Britain. If it wasn't for all these countries helping us out, you got Rochambeau, Lafayette, Marquez, there's just numerous foreigners that helped. A lot of the foreign allies, big reason. But one thing you can't do is the ideas of freedom. So you remember King George, he was violating these rights, freedom of speech, all that stuff you find in the Bill of Rights. You can't defeat that. There's no you can't you can't make somebody stop wanting that. And that's what the British are essentially trying to do is no, we're going to house our troops wherever we want. We're not going to let you put whatever you want in your newspapers. No matter how many rules or harsh punishments, that's about impossible to stop. You really can't do that. You can't suppress ideas. And that's the whole thing. That's why they're wanting the freedom to express their ideas. You can't do that. So that's one reason why. Just the ideas of freedom and what that means. But this has been the American Revolution. Hopefully it's been alright. Get better at these videos. But this has been History by Phillips. I've been Mr. Phillips. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, everybody take care, stay safe, and peace.